Welcome. You're listening to Dupee Deep with Dr. Nikki. This is the place where witty.
Let the original podcast roll, and then after that, we'll for sure have a couple breaks in there, you guys. You peoples, y'alls.
You people. You people. You people. Okay. Oh my God. Mm-hmm.
All right. Roll the podcast. Roll tape. I've always wanted to say that.
Hello, and welcome back to a new episode of Dupee Deep with Dr. Nikki and my less than illustrious co-host.
Hey, Dr. Nikki, how are you?
Good. Generally speaking, I guess that's the right answer. What I want to talk about today, though, is not very good. It's actually pretty awful. So we're going to kind of bypass our usually little funny intro banter back and forth, because I really think today's topic is too serious to even try to find the humor right now. And we want to talk about the recent hate crime against actor, and I don't think it's too much to say LGBTQ activist Jussie Smollett, who is on the hit Fox show Empire. So today's not a really light episode. It's not a time for a lot of jokes and banter, but we thought it was really important to talk about his victimization as representation of a really scary place that we're in right now in our overall society here in the U.S. with regard to how violence has become used very frequently and late as a mechanism for reinforcing or even promoting people's specific political values. So for those of you who aren't aware, at 2 a.m. in the morning, and Tomas, you might be able to fill in some of the blanks around this. I think that something had happened where Jussie Smollett had flown in or something. His flight got delayed or something. So he was getting in really late. And so he actually was doing something that millions of us have done before, right? You get off the plane, you've been traveling. The first thing you want to do is get something to eat. I know that's usually me. I'm either looking for someplace to get a coffee or someplace to grab something. And he went to Subway. It was late at night, so it was probably, it was 2 a.m. in the morning. So your choices are limited at that time, right? And he's unaccompanied, and he's recognized. And there's two white men who were in ski masks, reportedly, and they began yelling racial and homophobic slurs at him. Allegedly, they yelled, "Aren't you that faggot Empire nigger?" So they just threw it all in there one good time. They proceeded to beat him. They poured what we now know as bleach on him, and at some point hung a rope around his neck or placed a noose around his neck. So I would call this a hate crime. I would call this an attempted lynching. I certainly can't see it happening outside of the context of some people's misguided vitriol and hatred towards folks that are Black, towards folks that are out, folks who are gay. And it's really disgusting. It's really angering. It's really scary to think about the ease in which your life can be completely turned upside down these days, just by virtue of walking around as who you are. That there really is no sense of safety anymore if you're a person of color. Because I can think of several incidents for folks that this has happened to recently who are not celebrities. So that it happened to him, a pretty high profile person. Fox is a top rated TV show. He's a known celebrity. Really, I think is a critical statement on where we are as a country. And then the last piece that I think is really important to contextualize everything is that when they were walking away from him, they allegedly yelled, "This is MAGA country." And I don't think that we can have this conversation, Tomas, without talking about the broader political landscape that is, I would say, fueling, but at the very least, the backdrop for which this sort of hate crimes are happening with more and more frequency.
And I just want to add to that. I want to broaden that just a little bit, because while we want to have conversations in which human beings are human beings, we know that those oftentimes people are viewed by their categories. There is another category that you didn't mention. He is black, he is gay, but he's also Jewish. And that, I believe, should be a part of this conversation, because it plays into the nuances of all of that vitriol and hatred and violence.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. He's, So,
and let me just say, because of the human aspect, we say this so often that it has become to be empty, come to have be an empty sentiment. But I do honestly want to say, like, our thoughts from Dupee Deeps and prayers, positive thoughts and positive energy for a full and complete recovery, both physically but also mentally, because this is a traumatic event that he's had. Go out to him and his entire family, because that's the other thing that I don't think we talk enough about. When an event like this happens to one person, none of us live in isolation. We're all connected to family, to friends, to community, and that has impact for those people around him. And so we want to make sure that we just acknowledge them and their time of recovery, their grief, and for him and for anyone else who has experienced something traumatic like that, to remember to be patient with yourself and to have self-compassion through this process, that recovery takes time and oftentimes takes therapy, and there is no shame in that. And to be kind to yourself in the process of recovery. So, Tomas, when you brought this up to me, you were the first person to tell me about this. So today is Tuesday. It happened Tuesday, and it happened on a Tuesday. Whenever you might be listening to it, it happened on a Tuesday, and Tuesday is a day that I'm typically kind of in meetings and in class, and so I was away from my phone, hadn't checked in, and Tomas told me about this. And then, of course, what do? I get on social media, and it's all over my social media that this thing has happened. But for me, I just see it as the latest the latest event in a line of things that have happened, right? Like, I can think about Dylan Roof shooting up the church in South Carolina, 2015. We can think about the Charlottesville, Virginia riots that happened in the fall of, or late summer of 2017. Can think about, tell me if I'm pronouncing his name, Cesar Sayak, the MAGA bomber. Is Sayak? I don't know how to say his last name.
I think it's Sayak, I believe.
Right. And then the Tree of Life Synagogue, right, to your point about anti-Semitism shooting that happened in the fall of 2018. That same week of the Tree of Life Synagogue, there were 2 black people that were killed in the parking lot of a Kroger grocery store by another kind of crazed, gun-toting white supremacist. And these are the times that we're living in. And I'm here to say, for one, I don't like it. Like, not even a little bit. I don't, I lived through the DC sniper situation that happened. Oh my gosh, that was early 2000s. If you don't know it, Google it. There was a period of months in DC, or weeks probably, somewhere between 6 weeks and 2 months, I think, that this happened. And where there were random killings of people that were happening in the DC metro area. And I remember that sort of like heightened fearfulness and hypervigilance, because it was happening via sniper rifle. And so there wasn't a whole lot of really protection or anything that you could do, right? So people were at gas stations and living their lives, minding their business, and boom, out of nowhere, they would be shot. And there were several fatal shootings that happened with that. And so I remember, like, that was everything that people in that area and where I was working all of my friends, my family was calling to check on me, all of that when that was happening. So it was this heightened sense of awareness. What I worry about now, though, is two things. One is either you live in a state of kind of hypervigilance where you're constantly on guard because something could happen like this. I can also think about the young woman that got stabbed to death on the BART train in the Oakland area. And last summer as well, she was victimized just because she was a Black woman and was stabbed to death in front of her sister. So you either live with this sense of hypervigilance where you're constantly anxious, constantly keyed up. Your brain is operating at a higher level of stress, pumping cortisol and adrenaline and all of that good stuff into your system all the time. And that has some consequences that are not good for your mental health as well as for your physical well-being. Or you get into a place where you're acclimated to it and you're kind of immune to it because this is just now the new status quo. And I honestly don't know which one is the lesser of the two evils, to be quite honest. And I can't have this conversation without acknowledging that me being a mother and me being a parent takes on a different level of concern, stress than I think it would be, or remembering back for when I was single and that was happening. And what I mean by that is, my daughter is at that age where she's being socialized at school, that the police are the authority. And not only that, but that there are authority figures that will help you. Like there are things in life that keep you safe, right? Mommy keeps her safe. If you get into trouble, you call the police, you look to adults for help. And increasingly, it feels like that's more of a lie than it has been in my lifetime, right? And I'm not so ignorant and devoid of my understanding of history to know that there was a time in history not very far long ago in which Black people were lynched on a regular basis, and which threats to Black lives were more heightened than they actually are today. I get that numerically the number was much higher during Jim Crow era, during the Reconstruction era, and certainly the threat to life and inhumane living conditions for enslaved Black people was higher than we are experiencing now. So no disrespect to any of my ancestors that have come before me and paved the way for me. What I can say though is that the story, right, the narrative around that is that they lived through all of that so that I could be here to have a better life than they had, and that I am supposed to do better than I'm supposed to create a context that allows my daughter to do better than me. And it feels like, and Tomas pulling me back from the edge if I'm becoming too dark or too modeling or too negative, but it feels like we are regressing at a faster rate than I'm comfortable with. And so when my daughter says things like, you call the police, right, mommy? Or we're safe here, or we okay? That I'm lying to her. And I don't always know where the balance is between trying to make sure I'm doing the things to keep her safe and not messing up her sense of well-being and safety as a young person who needs to feel protected and loved and cared for. I don't always get it right.
I don't think you're going over the edge. I think that is a mother, any mother, speaking about their child, but specifically to Black mothers, yeah, I understand it. And so this one is a tough one for me, not because of the obvious similarities. Because whether they were in existence or not, I would still feel really bad about this. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of things for me that are challenging. And so I'm going to try to break them down point by point. Number one, my outrage and anger is a resource that I choose to use or not. Mm-hmm. So I am not inclined